the intelligence community.
Here's another look at what he said.
We had no Democrat support. We had no votes from the Democrats. They weren't going to give us a single vote, so it's a very difficult thing to do. So Obamacare is exploding. With no Democrat support, we couldn't quite get there. I think the losers are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, because now they own Obamacare. They own it. 100% own it. Just remember, this is not our bill, this is their bill. This really would have worked out better if we could have had some Democrat support. Remember this, we had no Democrat support.
Joining us now is former Democratic presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Senator Sanders, thanks for being with us. When you hear the president blaming the Democrats for his bill's collapse, what's your response?
Our response is that's exactly what the American people wanted. The American people understood that this is not a health care bill, Anderson. This was a $300 billion tax break for the top 2%, massive tax breaks for the drug companies and for the insurance companies, and threw 24 million people off of health insurance, defunded Planned Parenthood, significantly raised premiums for older workers, and cut Medicaid by $880 billion. Poll after poll showed that is exactly what the American people did not want, and Democrats should take credit for killing a really, really bad piece of legislation.
Who do you think is responsible for the failure to get the bill passed? I mean, you said credit should go to the Democrats. Who are the Republicans?
Anderson, that's just the media game. Nobody really cares that it's a failure of Trump or a failure of Ryan. What the American people are asking is, how does it happen that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right? Anderson, I am talking to you tonight 50 miles away from the Canadian border. We can get there in an hour. They manage to provide health care for every man, woman, and child in their country at half the cost per person than we do. The cost of prescription drugs in Canada, significantly lower than it is in the United States. So the question is, why are we not moving forward with a Medicare for all, single-payer program guaranteeing health care to all people, which will be much more cost-effective than what we presently have?
What actually do you think happens now? I know clearly that is what you would like to see happen, but the president is just talking about letting Obamacare fail. The CBO says it's not imploding in the way, it's not on a death spiral like many Republicans are saying it is. What do you actually see happening? There are many Democrats who say, look, things do need to be amended and changed in Obamacare.
Right. Right. Look, again, I believe in a Medicare for all single-payer program, but it ain't going to happen right now. We don't have the support in the Congress for that. So while we continue that long-term struggle, right now we need to improve the Affordable Care Act. And that means a public option available in every state in this country, which gives people a wide variety of options, but make sure that there is competition in every community in this country. In my view, it means lowering the age of Medicare from 65 down to 55, allowing more Americans to participate in that program. It means passing Medicare negotiating ability with the pharmaceutical industry and reimportation, allowing us to buy less expensive drugs around the world, which will not only lower the cost of medicine in this country, lower the cost of health care. Those are some short-term remedies that I think we need to go forward on.
But obviously you would need to convince Republicans in the House. That's not going to happen, it seems, at this point. So what happens just over the next year? I mean, the president is saying this is going to fail on its own. Democrats are going to come back to him a year from now trying to make a deal.
Well, you know, Anderson, I look at life a little bit differently, needless to say, than the president does. I think one of the reasons that this legislation went down today is that all over this country, we had hundreds of thousands of people coming out to rallies. CNN covered town meetings where instead of having 20 or 30 people agreeing with their Republican member of Congress, oh, well, let's cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, you had 1,000 people showing up saying, you know what, you're not gonna triple the rates that I pay for health insurance. You're not going to throw me off of Medicaid. People began the process of fighting back. We have got to continue that. The Republican agenda, tax breaks for billionaires, massive cuts to health care, great increase in expenditures for the military budget, not acknowledging the reality of climate change. All of those ideas are way out of touch with where the American people are. Our job now is to rally the American people to demand that the U.S. Congress represent the middle class of this country, not just the 1%.
What is your opinion on this Republican notion that Obamacare is going to explode, that it's in a death spiral, that it's going to explode?
Well, I think the evidence suggests that that is not the case. But on the other hand, what is fair to acknowledge is deductibles in many cases are too high, premiums are too high, and while Obamacare has slowed down the rate of health care increase, it is going up much too fast. So what a sensible approach is to say, okay, here are the problems. Give you one example, Anderson, could give you a million. A couple of years ago, the last statistics that we had, the 5 major drug companies in this country made $50 billion in profit. 5 companies, while they charged the American people the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. If we had Medicare negotiating prescription drug prices with the drug companies, if we allowed pharmacists and distributors to buy lower-cost medicine from Canada and other countries, we could lower the cost of prescription drugs, lower the cost of health care. Now, Trump has talked a lot about the high cost of prescription drugs. I suspect it's just another lie. I don't think he was serious about it. But if Republicans are serious, let's work together. That's one way to save billions of dollars for Americans in terms of health care costs.
When you heard the president say nobody knew how tough this would be, nobody knew how tough it would be to overturn Obamacare, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I thought it was rather amusing that a few weeks ago, President Trump said, health care is really complicated. Well, you know, for those of us who are on the Health Education Committee, those of us who had dozens and dozens of hearings and markups, spent long times marking up this bill, yeah, health care is pretty complicated. But at the end of the day, this is the bottom line here, we pay by far much more per capita for health care than do the people of any other country. Double the Canadians, almost triple the British, and our health care outcomes in many respects are not as good. So I think we need to rethink a health care system which is dominated by private for-profit insurance companies, dominated by very greedy drug companies, and let's go forward and try to protect the American people and not just wealthy campaign contributors.
Senator Sanders, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just ahead, in the hours before the GOP health care bill was pulled, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said over and over that President Trump had given his all in trying to close the deal. So what happened? More on that ahead.
This morning, the president announced the official approval of the president.
President Trump could not seal the deal, but not for lack of trying, certainly, according to White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
When you look at legislative efforts, I think the president has given it his all. The president's put a lot of time and effort into this, and I think he's made a strong case. I think it shocked a lot of people, frankly, how very, very detail-oriented, how personal it was for him. There's no question, in my mind at least, that the president and the team have left everything on the field. Has the team put everything out there? Have we left everything on the field? Absolutely. We've done everything. We've done every single thing that, every meeting, every call, calling members, you know, as early as 6 in the morning and going to 11 o'clock at night the last several nights. Has he pulled out every stop? Has he called every member? Has he tweaked every tweak? Has he done every single thing he can possibly and used every minute of every day that's possible to get this thing through? Then the answer is yes.
Sean Spicer in the hours leading up to the bill's ultimate defeat. Brian Fallon, we haven't heard from you. How damaging is this for President Trump in terms of what he wants to do moving forward?
Pretty damaging, and I think that it's his failure. He can say that it was Paul Ryan's bill, but the decision to outsource the drafting of this to Paul Ryan was his decision, and he didn't go out there and sell it. This whole process has only taken about 3 weeks, and he's not been out there on the stump selling the bill. It has a 17% approval rating according to Quinnipiac. That's his problem. He should have gone out and fixed it. And internally, he may have gone through the motions of lobbying members of Congress. He brought people into the White House. He did go to Capitol Hill. But at the end of the day, people didn't fear him. We kept hearing for days that these Freedom Caucus members were ultimately going to succumb because of fear that he was going to come to their districts and primary them. He actually, in one of the Capitol Hill meetings, he stood up and apparently pointed to Meadows, the head of the Freedom Caucus, and said, "I'm going to come after you." And people didn't know whether he was truly threatening or actually joking. The reality is Mark Meadows never went along with the bill. He defied him till the very end. The Kochs, all these outside Republican groups, did not fear the president. And that's going to be a problem for him when it comes time to pass things like the debt ceiling, where he's going to need them to take uncomfortable votes, and right now they're not afraid.
In fact, the Kochs were saying, we're going to give those who are opposing this, we're going to support you, we're going to have your back. Congressman Kingston, I mean, you look at the president's term so far, and again, it's very early, and every president has an adjustment from campaigning to actually leading, but failed to repeal and replace Obamacare, the travel ban blocked twice by federal courts, the Iran nuclear deal that he promised he would rip up on day one didn't happen, the border wall, very doubtful Mexico is going to pay for it, no truth to the wiretap claims. How do you spin this as a good start?
Well, number one, he's got a great cabinet, and he's about to get a Supreme Court nominee. Chuck Schumer is not looking good in his opposition to Gorsuch. I mean, he may be the good, loyal oppositionist, but nobody's taking him seriously.
The Supreme Court pick clearly is a success. If he gets...
Yeah, he's going to get that. Keystone Pipeline, $8 billion project that Obama held up for 7 years. Today, Charter Communication has announced a $25 billion investment, 20,000 new jobs. He's, had success with Lockheed, had success with Carrier. He is talking to businesses. And, these aren't really government programs, but these are wins, and these are things that conservative voters are going to say, yeah, I
Do you
like
think
what you're doing.
overall, for this first 60-some-odd days, he is winning?
I think he is. I think he is winning. I think that it's still a very tough atmosphere in Washington, D.C., and people tend to give the president the benefit of the doubt. No matter who the president is, they still have so much
But his
star
approval
power.
rating is 37%. So it looks like they're not giving him that much
But
of a
not
benefit of
among
the doubt.
Republicans.
And let me say this about the selling of the bill that Brian was talking about. This president knows how to sell stuff. He does. He knows how to go out there and go on the stump and make the case. The problem, I think, this time was that he couldn't make the case because he didn't really believe in the case.
Well, it's the art of the deal, not the
and
art
they
of someone
didn't
else's deal.
educate the public about what was in the bill that is better than what is in Obamacare. People didn't know. They heard the Democrats made a very good case in opposition, I would argue, and they were out there every minute making that case. And the Republicans did not go home and make the case. And when they were first attacked at their town hall meetings, that was the first sign. That was the sign that they were in trouble.
Do you think those town hall meetings had a big impact?
Yes, I do. And I think, they went back to the negotiating table. You saw a lot of them got nervous, and maybe the president got nervous. I don't know. But he never said, this is better than Obamacare. This provision will do more for you than Obamacare did. So he never got out there and sold it.
I'm going to come back. Number one, if you take Sean Spicer at his word, that's a pretty damning indictment of the president's sway then. If he did everything he could, and he couldn't move members of his own party after taking over the party and winning the election, that's a pretty damning indictment of how much sway the president has. I will disagree with the Democrats a little bit to say in the last couple of weeks. I do think the president put a lot into this in the last couple of weeks. I think he put a hell of a lot into this in the last couple of weeks. But if you had studied history, like immigration for Republicans, this is the quicksand of American politics, health care. Those Democrats who voted for Obamacare thought they were casting a good vote. They lost 63 seats in the House in the next election. Now, a lot of that, we were still in a recession. We had 10% unemployment. It's not all in Obamacare. But then in 2014, after losing the House in 2010, in 2014, the Democrats lost the Senate. Do you not think that every Republican today, thinking about, am I undecided on this? Am I yes, am I or no? Was thinking about the history of the politics, number one. Plus, you do have profound policy differences within the Republican Party. The Freedom Caucus people don't believe the government should be in the healthcare business. They think this should be in the market, and the government should have a very limited role. The 26 Republicans who Hillary Clinton carried their district, well, they have to answer to a very different set of voters who did not want to take away guaranteed maternity coverage, did not want to take away guaranteed mental health coverage. And so Donald Trump did not run on a very specific health care plan. He ran on repeal and replace, and it will be better for you. I promise. But he did run on taxes and trade.
But if he was going to touch health care, he didn't litigate it. Obama and Clinton and Edwards litigated health care. They spent a ton of time on the detail in the campaign. They fought about universal coverage. They fought about this specific subset. And then the president took months to sell it to the country. He even went to the House Republican Conference in Baltimore, where Mike Pence introduced him. And it was fake. I'll say it right up front.
Yeah,
it was
fake.
President Obama was not genuine in his outreach to Republicans on health care, but he at least
check
But he was
the
familiar
box.
with all the
At least
details.
check the box. This is so complicated. We were talking about this during the break. If once the president decided to let Ryan, to outsource the bill to Ryan, to take the insider's game, do health care first, not your outsider agenda that you ran on, they needed to do work. They should have been doing work during the transition, going to these southern members' districts and saying, I'm going to ask Anderson Cooper to cast a vote he doesn't want to cast for me when we go back to Washington in January, and I'm telling you, you voted for me, back him up. And they didn't do that later.
That's where I don't think they're going to make that mistake as we get to taxes, we get to infrastructure, we get to trade. Look, this administration has to get back to Donald Trump issues. Again, taxes, trade, immigration, defeating ISIS. Those are really the cores, really the things that move voters. Might not have been traditional Republican voters.
But wasn't the repeal in place Obamacare? I mean, wasn't that a huge issue? I mean, that was the #1 thing for Donald Trump, wasn't it?
It wasn't the primary, though. That was more of a Ted Cruz issue. I actually did. No, I'm talking about in the primary. His core issues were a lot more.
We just played it.
I thought to 20 rallies, Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, a guy who gets 40 speeches a day. But let me say
that was on day one.
Let me say this. If that bill,
I probably went to 20 rallies where Donald Trump spoke.
I
never saw him speak about politics.
That was it.
That's interesting. You're saying it was obligatory, that he was faking it.
I'm just saying it's an obligatory Republican line for everybody who runs for office wearing the R.
That was written by his staffer. That was written by his staffer, Paul Manafort.
Let me say this.
In fact, let's just look at this again, just so, because I think I'm in an alternate universe here. Let's just take a look at what he said.
On my first day, I'm going to ask Congress to immediately send me a bill to repeal and replace Obamacare. Immediately repealing and replacing the disaster known as Obamacare. Immediately repealing and replacing Obamacare. We will be able to immediately repeal and replace Obamacare.
Even use both hands.
Let me say this. Those, if I was looking at the sign, those were all after he got the nomination.
Okay.
And I'm just getting back to Jason's point. His core issues really were job, strong national defense to begin with, and that's where he really likes to be. I mean, it is an obligatory.
His jobs agenda
let me
was
say this.
repeal and replace Obamacare. When you asked him what he was going to do on the jobs, he would say,
but if at the end of all this process,
are you guys really erasing repeal
Wait a minute. No.
Donald Trump's agenda?
Wait, let me finish this point.
That was day one of his campaign.
At the end of all this process, the best that we as Republicans could come up with was a bill that had a 17% approval rating, I think the president and the smart guys in the back room probably said, you know what? Let's get out of this thing. Because you're about to make your guys walk the plank for a bill that's going to get killed in the Senate.
So why not pull it?
The Speaker talked him into that.
Bill, that's not one of the real rearview mirror.
Today he said, I'm here 64 days. I never said repeal and replace in 64 days. No, he actually said sooner than that.
We got to take a quick break. Just that we have other breaking news on Capitol Hill. 3 former top aides during the Trump campaign, including Paul Manafort, have volunteered to be grilled by the House Intelligence Committee, actually saying top aides when Carter Page is referenced is not really correct. Anyway, at least 2 top aides. The Republican chairman of that committee has sprung a surprise, canceling their next public hearing, drawing new fire for doing so. We'll get into all of that in a minute. There's more breaking news tonight. 3 former advisors to President Trump during the campaign have volunteered to be questioned by Congress about their possible collusion with Russia, including former campaign chairman Paul Manafort. And House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes made this surprise announcement.
The committee will ask Director Comey and Admiral Rogers to appear in closed session and will postpone the previously scheduled March 28th hearing in order to make time available for Director Comey and Admiral Rogers. The committee seeks additional information from Monday's hearing that can only be addressed in closed session.
Well, the committee's ranking Democrat, Congressman Adam Schiff, slammed Nunes for canceling Tuesday's hearing, saying it is more proof that Nunes is biased.
One of the profound takeaways of the last couple days is we really do need an independent commission here because the public at the end of the day needs to have confidence that someone has done a thorough investigation untainted by political considerations.
Well, tensions between Nunes and Schiff have been ramping up all week. Today's new developments just cranked it up further. Jessica Schneider tonight has more details.
Paul Manafort, Carter Page, and Roger Stone are already under FBI investigation for their contacts with Russians known to U.S. intelligence. Now they say they'll go before lawmakers. Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign chairman, resigned amid questions about his previous lobbying for pro-Russian interests in Ukraine. Today, a spokesman said Manafort looks forward to meeting with those conducting serious investigations of these issues to discuss the facts. Campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page denied allegations that he secretly met with Putin associates. He told the committee, "I would look forward to engaging with you in the interest of finally ending this ruse." And the attorney for Roger Stone, a former advisor to Donald Trump, says Stone is anxious to talk. Stone told CNN, "I acknowledge I am a hardball player. I have sharp elbows. But one thing isn't in my bag of tricks: treason."
Michael Flynn.
Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn is also under FBI investigation, but his spokesman had no comment on whether Flynn might make a similar offer. Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes suddenly canceling next week's open hearing with former Director of National Intelligence, retired General James Clapper, former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, and former CIA Director John Brennan. The ranking Democrat on the committee accusing the White House of meddling in the process.
There must have been a very strong pushback from the White House about the nature of Monday's hearing. It's hard for me to come to any other conclusion about why an agreed-upon hearing would be suddenly canceled. Stating the obvious, maybe.
Nunes wants the FBI director and National Security Agency Director Mike Rogers to come back next week in a closed session. Nunes refuses to disclose what new information he has and where he got it, but he says it revealed incidental collection of communications by President Trump and his associates.
You can ask me every single name that exists on the planet, and I'm still not going to tell you who our sources are.
Schiff calling for an independent investigation, saying he's concerned that Nunes may have shared investigative information with the White House.
To take evidence that may or may not be related to the investigation to the White House was wholly inappropriate, and of course cast grave doubts into the ability to run a credible investigation.
The House Intel Committee is expecting information from the NSA over the next few days on the issue of unmasking. It's that process of revealing the names of Americans in reports when they're supposed to be hidden. Well, Chairman Nunes says they want to know why these names were unmasked and if any additional names were revealed. Anderson?
Thanks very much. Much more ahead. In the next hour of 360, we're learning more about how the Republican health care plan collapsed and why President Trump was unable to clinch a deal. Now that the bill is dead, the finger-pointing, well, that is beginning. We'll be right back.
I've been saying for...
Welcome back to the second hour of 360. Failure, fallout, and finger-pointing after GOP legislation to repeal and replace Affordable Care Act collapsed. Details of the bill were less than popular with the public. It was seen as too harsh by moderate Republicans and not tough enough in the eyes of some conservatives. In the end, neither House Speaker Paul Ryan nor the President could bridge the divide. Vote on the bill was postponed last night and canceled this afternoon. A short time later, the President weighed in. Here's a portion of his remarks from the Oval Office.
We were very close. It was a very, very tight margin. We had no Democrat support. We had no votes from the Democrats. They weren't going to give us a single vote, so it's a very difficult thing to do. I've been saying for the last year and a half that the best thing we can do, politically speaking, is let Obamacare explode. It is exploding right now. We couldn't quite get there. We're just a very small number of votes short in terms of getting our bill passed. A lot of people don't realize how good our bill was because they were viewing phase one, but when you add phase two, which was mostly the signings of Secretary Price, who's behind them, and you add phase three, which I think we would have gotten, it became a great bill. And I think the losers are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, because now they own Obamacare. They own it, 100% own it. And this is not a Republican health care. This is not anything but a Democrat health care. And they have Obamacare for a little while longer until it ceases to exist, which it will at some point in the near future. And just remember, this is not our bill, this is their bill. Now, when they all become civilized and get together and try and work out a great health care bill for the people of this country, we're open to it. We're totally open to it. I want to thank the Republican Party. I want to thank Paul Ryan. He worked very, very hard. I will tell you that. He worked very, very hard. Tom Price and Mike Pence, who's right here, our vice president, our great vice president. Everybody worked hard. I worked as a team player and would have loved to have seen it pass. But again, I think you know I was very clear, because I think there wasn't a speech I made, or very few, where I didn't mention that perhaps the best thing that could happen is exactly what happened today, because we'll end up with a truly great health care bill in the future after this mess known as Obamacare explodes. And I never said, I guess I'm here, 64 days? I never said repeal and replace Obamacare. You've all heard my speeches. I never said repeal it and replace it within 64 days. I have a long time.
Well, joining us from the North Lawn, CNN's Sarah Murray. Sarah, it really looks like the president is so far keeping a stiff upper lip. Maggie Haberman told us in the last hour that she interviewed him today. That he was very measured in his conversation with her. Privately, are you getting a sense of how he's handling this defeat?
Well, it's a little bit stunning, Anderson, for a president that we've seen willing to publicly fume about really any slight, including when it involved members of his own party. But that is certainly not the president we saw today. I do think his aides are even insisting that he's okay with this defeat. I mean, he obviously wanted a win. This White House certainly needed a win in such a difficult week. But I think part of this stems from the fact that he did health care first because he felt like this was what they needed to do first. This is what Republicans ran on for 7 years. This is what the House Speaker said they should do first. But it's not really Donald Trump's first passion. He would much prefer to move on to tax reform. And I think he certainly feels like now he has given health care a shot. They made an attempt, and they can move on to priorities he personally is more invested in.
The White House seems poised to steer the blame away from the president, obviously, and from the Republican Party. Basically, I mean, the president keeps talking about the Democrats are at fault.
This was an impressive bit of politics right here, Anderson, to see the president come out today and say repeatedly, this is the fault of Nancy Pelosi, this is the fault of Democrats, because we couldn't get anyone on board. The reality is the White House didn't work all that hard to get Democrats on board for this legislation. They knew that there was really no chance they were going to convince Democrats in the House to support any kind of repeal and replace for Obamacare. But I think you're beginning to see this blame shifting, and it is telling to see the president out there blaming Democrats rather than offering sharp words to Paul Ryan. A number of people have said this is sure to strain his relationship with the House Speaker, but that's not what we heard from the president today. We heard him take pains to layer praise upon the House Speaker and make sure to try to place this blame squarely on the Democrats. It'll be interesting to see, though, Anderson, how this plays out in some of these future negotiations, how comfortable the president is trusting Paul Ryan when we get to things like tax reform.
Yeah, Sarah Murray, thanks very much. Let's go next to the Capitol, where CNN's Phil Mattingly has more on how things came unraveled. There's no shortage, Phil, of fingers being pointed right now. Based on your discussions with folks, walk us through the behind-the-scenes of the relationship between the Speaker and the President. What happened?
Well, it lines up a lot with what you were just hearing from Sarah. The Speaker returned the favor publicly today, praising President Trump, praising his team for everything he's done. And I think an interesting element here is kind of how their relationship has grown throughout this process. Anderson, I'm told not only did they meet in person today for that lunch for 90 minutes, but they actually spoke by phone 4 different times today. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, they've been talking by phone multiple times a day, every single day. And I'm told repeatedly their relationship, person to person, is actually in a good place. I think there are a lot of concerns, though, on the staff level. I think there's a lot of concerns about who the points of contact are over at the White House, who can actually speak for things over at the White House, and some concern that maybe at various points in this health care negotiation, that undercut what Republican leaders on Capitol Hill were trying to do. The interesting thing going forward, Anderson, and I think Sarah talked a lot about what the next steps are going to be, what the agenda items are going to be, is if this relationship continues to stay in a good place or if it devolves. As of now, now, it seems like it's the former.
It's obviously early. Is there any sense, though, on Capitol Hill right now how damaged Republicans truly are?
Look, it's not good for them any way you cut it. And I've been talking to a lot of Republicans, both lawmakers in the immediate wake of this happening and a lot of staff members as well, a lot of people over in the Senate who are waiting for this bill to come over next week. I think it's a little bit of a wait-and-see mode, but they recognize there will be very real political damage back home in their districts. You think about the fact that they've promised this cycle after cycle after cycle. The big question becomes, where do they go from here? When they get to tax reform, when they get to infrastructure, is the decision by House Republicans, particularly the most conservative ones, that, hey, we've put our hands on the stove, we've gotten burnt a little bit, now we all need to get to work together? Or do they decide to keep moving in this direction, where they sink bills? And what I've heard repeatedly is, does this force President Trump to start working with Democrats, to start reaching out to Democrats? That is not what conservatives on Capitol Hill want. That could be what happens going forward if things don't change and get better in the relations between the White House and Capitol Hill, Anderson.
Phil Mattingly. Phil, thanks very much. Long day for you. Let's bring in the panel. Joining us this hour, senior political analyst David Gergen, Daily Beast senior columnist Matt Lewis, former Ted Cruz communications director Amanda Carpenter joining the panel, as well as everyone else. Matt, we haven't heard from you. What do you want to talk about?
All right. Not a great day, but I do think that, look, there's this conventional wisdom that says that this is catastrophic and it's humiliating. And I think that Donald Trump says, who says it has to be? Abandonment is an underrated political tactic. What happened today is really bad for one day, but it could have been worse. For one thing, this thing could have dragged on for weeks or months. There could have been fights in the Senate, and then it could have gone down in flames. The other option is they could have passed this really bad bill, then they would have truly owned it, and then when premiums went up and when people got kicked off of their health insurance, they would have paid the price in the midterms and maybe in 4 years. So, yes, it's a bad day. Sometimes it's better to pull the Band-Aid off.
I guess, Amanda, and I think to a point you made earlier, Jason, which is why after 7 years of talking about this is the first thing they come up with a really bad bill. Jason was saying earlier they should have had something on day one for President Trump. Here it is.
Yeah, well, here's what happened. No one expected Trump to win. He didn't have a real repeal and replace plan. He outsourced that to Paul Ryan, but then Paul Ryan depended on Trump to deliver, to take care of the politics. President Trump did not take care of the politics. He did not deliver the conservatives because no one understood that the conservatives were dead set on real repeal. There's been a debate throughout the campaigns over we would do repeal or repeal and replace. It was not a sealed done deal that everyone wanted to do repeal and replace simultaneously. The Freedom Caucus has always been against that, and that played out in spectacular fashion, and they learned it the hard way today.
And one of the things that's worth mentioning too is the last time we had a situation like this, when George W. Bush became president, you had even people like your former boss Jim DeMint who would go into the Oval Office, and George W. Bush said, you have to support this amendment or it'll be a bloodbath. And even Jim DeMint, before he kind of learned that lesson, went along with things. He didn't vote for No Child Left Behind, but things like amendments to it,
but then
right?
He started playing the outside game.
And then he learned the lesson. And that
Mm-hmm.
is my point, is that now this Freedom Caucus, there is an infrastructure that has been built up by the conservative movement in the past decade. These guys are tougher. They've joined together, and they're going to be much harder.
They had a fundamental miscalculation here, though, which was they've shown that they can organize as a bloc. They showed that they could have real power as far as impacting legislation. They could have been the group. They could have put this over the top, and they could all be celebrating this weekend. So we've taken the first steps to repeal and replace Obamacare. But again, no one's going to come up to them and be throwing them high fives when they're
But the Club for Growth didn't exist 10 years ago.
Now they got to own it.
Freedom Works didn't exist 10 years ago. Heritage Action
Here's the
didn't.
thing. The leadership thought that Trump could deliver on some of this. He was doing videos saying, please call your congressman. He has no grassroots organization to get people to lobby in favor of the bill. Everyone, I saw leadership aide saying, watch Trump's Twitter. He's going to go after people like he did Rand Paul. It amounted to nothing.
Because
Trump
he
does
didn't
not
love
have
it.
the pull that conservative groups do.
He didn't really love this bill.
No,
he didn't even really like this bill.
It wasn't his bill.
What? It wasn't his bill?
His bill.
Well, it
We
was
should
his bill.
Policy.
It actually was his bill. But this is this Freedom Caucus is the reason John Boehner is off somewhere tonight having a nice glass of Merlot, right? I mean, they did this to John Boehner. They got rid of John Boehner. That was it. And this is going to come back to Donald Trump again and again if he wants to do infrastructure, if he wants to do tax reform. So now the question is, what are the limits of presidential leadership for Donald Trump? Has he run into this now, or Or is he going to go after these guys? I mean, I don't know what he does next.
He needs to get back on the road and start going after Senate Democrats, which is where, if I were this administration, I would put him on the road, going to Indiana, talking about Joe Donnelly, and I'd start talking about tax reform.
But David, how wounded is the president just because of his low poll numbers? I mean, does that have an impact on his ability to twist arms?
He's wounded. I think it's worth pointing out that other presidents have had a hard time with health care reform. You know, we've had 7 who've tried it. You know, Bill Clinton had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate with his health care with Hillary, and they couldn't get it onto the floor. They couldn't get it out of committee. Now, this happened, you know, sort of over a year into his presidency. He had already had other accomplishments. Trump has gotten hurt because this is the first big test right in his presidency. And so he emerges from this week with a cloud over his credibility, right over the whole question of wiretapping. He's got a cloud now over the relationship of his team, his associates with the Russians, and where is that investigation going. And now he's got a cloud over his capacity to govern, his capacity to make the deal. He ran as the deal maker, the great deal maker, the closer, what have you, and he failed miserably with that. And I think he does have to go back. I think Amanda is right. He has to go back to fundamentals, like not outsourcing your ideas to somebody in the House of Representatives. They've got to come from you, something you're passionate about. He just sort of went along for the ride on it.
But I mean, John, is that the kind of leader he is? I mean, you know, on the campaign trail, he was never talking about the details of health care reform or really any kind of details. You get the sense that as a leader, much like perhaps Ronald Reagan, he had sort of broad brush ideas and would kind of leave details.
But Ronald Reagan had been the governor of a very complicated state. People often try to make Ronald Reagan to be this sort of...
Jeffrey Lord's not here, so I had to throw in Reagan.
No, but people often describe this, and Democrats fall prey to this, as this village idiot who came to Washington. They used to say this about George W. Bush. You know, he's the village idiot who came to Washington. He'd been the governor of Texas.
Well, also everyone would...
You know, and so it's a different environment. Look, this is new for President Trump. He's never been a politician. He's never been the CEO of a government enterprise. He's been the CEO of a business enterprise, but not something big and far-flung. And he's run a family business where loyalty to Donald Trump is a premium. The Republican Party is split into so many different fractions now, and they have legitimate policy fights over this. Some of this is politics. Some of this is I don't like the speaker, or I don't really like the president, or he's really not my president. You know, that's not my Republican Party. But most of this, what we saw today, was they have real, honest-to-God differences. That Mark Meadows has a very different view of the federal government's role in health care, you know, than Leonard Lance in New Jersey does. It's just hard to resolve. And the president, if they were going to do this first, they needed to do more work beforehand. To the broader question, we make things too complicated sometimes. I agree with Matt. We can overdo this. We can overdo this. However, the president's brand was, I'm a deal maker. I am going to fix a broken Washington. He needs a win at some point. His voters are very loyal to him. Republican voters are going to be mad at their Congress because they have been waiting for 7 years for this opportunity. Trump voters are different than Republican voters. I think they give this president more grace. They understand he's new to this, and they understand this town has been dysfunctional a very long time. But his brand is, I'm different. Barack Obama's brand was, I'm new, I'm different, I will fix a broken Washington. When he couldn't do that, that's when he started to lose the middle of the electorate. Donald Trump never really had the middle of the electorate, but he has his people. At some point, your brand suffers. I'm not going to write an obituary right now, but he needs a win.
Right? He needs a win, and the normal way to go get one would be to make cause with Democrats. Go back to what Phil Mattingly said. He said he's going to now suddenly start to look to maybe leverage some sway over these recalcitrant House Republicans by maybe dangling some ideas out at Democrats. I think it's probably too late for him to do that. If he had come out of the box and suggested some ideas on repairing the Affordable Care Act, I think it would have put a lot of pressure on red state Democrats to actually work with him. Similarly, if he came out of the box and proposed the infrastructure proposal that he talked about all during the campaign, there would have been a ton of pressure on red state Democrats to work with him. Instead, he's uniting them. They're all united probably against this Supreme Court pick, even on an issue where they should feel pressure to work with him on a Supreme Court pick. They're largely lining up against him. And so I don't think they're going to be there to try to triangulate against these House Republicans in the Freedom Caucus.
So you think if he had chosen to do infrastructure first, that...
I think two things would have happened. The base would have said, resistance, hashtag resistance.
Yeah.
You have to oppose Donald Trump at every turn. Don't give him any wins. But there would have been a ton of middle-of-the-road Democrats that were staring at a 2018 re-election race that would have said, you know what? I've talked about this proposal. I have to at least hear him out. And it would have split...
Barack Obama and Donald Trump were both elected as sort of change agents, and both of them could have tried to transcend their parties. I think President Obama, you know, made a mistake by pushing through Obamacare and in a very partisan, party-line fashion. Donald Trump similarly could have triangulated and sort of, you know, transcended partisanship, and he also chose to go to his base.
Yeah, I will say this quickly. Donald Trump has to deliver a win for Republicans soon because he needs political cover on these Russia questions. If he doesn't deliver a win for Republicans that they can go home and tell constituents, this is why I'm with the president, if he doesn't give them the policy, he won't have political protection on the other issues. Already McCain, Lindsey Graham are ready to throw him under the bus. They will throw him under quicker if there's not a win on health care or tax policy very soon.
Winning cures everything. I think taxes is a place to go and get it. I think Neil Gorsuch is another win that he's going to get. And again, when we talk about the economy, really what got Donald Trump into the presidency in the first place, 48% of American people think the economy is moving in the right direction. Highest number it's been since 2003. That is what is going to give this president.
What about the
The market response right now has been on the idea that he's going to get things done on health care and tax reform. And now that looks like it's not happening.
Tax reform. It's always been about tax reform.
This puts a real cloud over his capacity to get tax reform done. They were counting on as much as $500 billion, you know, of improvement in the economic outlook of the government that they wouldn't have to make up for in the tax bill. With that disappeared, the climb for tax reform is going to be really hard. It's going to be easier to get corporate, but personal, hard.
A lot more to talk about when we come back. Our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, joins us to talk about the idea that without big changes, as in today's abandoned legislation, Obamacare will explode or implode, which is what the Republicans are saying. Is it in what critics call a death spiral or not? The idea that Obamacare is teetering on the brink of a collapse has been debunked a number of times, most recently the Congressional Budget Office's scoring of the replacement bill. It concluded that neither the replacement nor the existing law, Obamacare, will send insurance markets into a death spiral. We talked about it earlier tonight with Vermont Senator and former Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. What is your opinion on this Republican notion that Obamacare is going to explode, that it's in a death spiral, that it's going to explode?
Well, I think the evidence suggests that that is not the case. But on the other hand, what is fair to acknowledge is deductibles in many cases are too high, premiums are too high, and while Obamacare has slowed down the rate of health care increase, it is going up much too fast.
Well, let's get more perspective now from our own healthcare expert, CNN chief medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta. So we just heard politicians on both sides of the aisle give their take into Obamacare. I want to take a minute to step away from the politics of this. From a doctor's perspective, what are you seeing regarding Obamacare?
Well, you know, every hospital in America takes care of a certain number of patients who are referred to as indigent care patients, patients who either are underinsured or uninsured. And that was the situation for a long time. What you saw over the last 7 years is simply that more patients had insurance. Now, what that means practically in a hospital, first of all, the hospital's more likely to get paid, more likely to get reimbursed, but also patients were more likely to come in earlier in the course of their disease until waiting quite late in the course of their disease. If you prescribed medications, and because of prescription drug coverage, they could get those medications. If, in my case, I'm a neurosurgeon, so if I scheduled surgery, I'd run into situations, Anderson, where patients they'd come in, they'd have this problem, they needed surgery, but you wouldn't see them again because they knew they wouldn't possibly be able to afford the operation. So, or they would, it would put them into bankruptcy. So now that sort of situation has changed. I think primarily in indigent care hospitals, but I think, again, all hospitals, I think, have been impacted by this in some way.
What does the greater medical community think of the Affordable Care Act?
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you ask the greater medical community and they poll on this, say what percentage of doctors across the board will give this an A grade, the Affordable Care Act an A grade, it's very low. 3.5% or so will actually give it an A grade. You can see the numbers there, a quarter or so give it a failing grade. So it's not to say that people thought this was perfect, by no means. Those aren't great grades. But they still, when asked the follow-up question, do you want to get rid of it, they overwhelmingly said no, they didn't want to get rid of it. There was changes, they said, that needed to be made, specifically in terms of lowering costs, specifically in terms of decreasing the paperwork. The sentiment has been among a lot of physicians that we've talked to that we're just being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. We were 22,000 primary care doctors short even before Affordable Care Act was implemented, and then you added millions more to the insurance, and now we're stretched even thinner. So all of that was going on as well. But still, on balance, the idea that people had health care insurance, that they get their care, that when you recommended something to the patient, they were going to carry through on it because they had insurance, that overall was a more positive sentiment.
All right, Sanjay, thanks very much. Stay with us. I want to bring in the rest of the panel. I mean, I guess my question is, what happens? I mean, clearly the government's not, President Trump is not going to be encouraging more people to sign on for Obamacare. So what happens what happens moving forward?
If you take the president at his word today, we wait a little bit here. I think one of the interesting challenges is, he's right, the Democrats passed Obamacare, so they quote-unquote own it. Fine. He's president of the United States now. The Republicans control the Senate. The Republicans control the House of Representatives. A lot of these problems, especially with the options, where there's only one insurer, or you can't your coverage, a lot of those are in rural areas. A lot of those are Trump voters. And so when these members of Congress, who, again, the Republicans, who have promised for 6, 7 years now to repeal and replace Obamacare, first it was repealed, replace came later, but when they go home now, their constituents can't vote against Barack Obama. They can't vote against a Democratic member of Congress. The Republicans own this. They're responsible for running government now. They don't own how Obamacare got here, but they do own where we go from this day forward just by the simple fact that they run the government. And again, if people are stuck in traffic, they blame the politician now. It may not be fair, but they blame the guy who's in office now. And that is a fundamental thing that the Republicans have to come to grips with. Now, will they wait a while? Clearly they will. The Speaker's not in the mood to touch this again right away. The President made clear today, not him.
It's such a huge, massive bill, and I think what happened to the Republicans here, and their problem going forward, is they got stuck on the replace part. If they had just had a vote for repeal and said, we're repealing it, and over the next 2 years, we're going to replace it, and give people a little time to kind of figure out what the right bill was, talk to the insurance industry, get the stakeholders together, get your party together, get maybe some Democrats together and say, look, we're repealing this 2 years from now. We voted to do it, and we're going to work out how we're going to do it, and we're going to let you know gradually so we don't surprise you. That might have worked a little bit better than this. Now I think they're stuck with figuring out some kind of incremental things that they can do to fix the problems with Obamacare.
The problem with the repeal, though, was the worry that you actually then would have the death spiral, that insurance companies would say, hey, let's get out of this. And,
but they wouldn't repeal it. They would vote to repeal it, say it's not happening for a couple of years.
The sequester, the notion that people will work together if you force them to work together, if you give them a deadline? I'm not convinced they actually would have had a bill. 2 years later, well, they might still have been in this position.
But there might have been a lot of pressure, and there might have been more stakeholders in it, and that's all I'm saying. There had to have been a better way to do it. I know it's Monday morning quarterback.
There was agreement on repeal. That should have been the starting point. Repeal the bill, and then that forces everyone to have the conversation about what you do next. This is actually what Congressman Brooks was proposing last night on CNN. Essentially, let's break this thing, and then everyone else has to buy into the fix.
We lost our
opportunity. That is a good strategy.
We lost our opportunity for an outright repeal in 2013. That was our chance when we could have had an outright repeal. Still would have had President Obama there, but I think now the fact that, let's look at President Trump here for a moment, what he said on the campaign trail, just an outright repeal and just leave it alone, that would really cut against kind of this populist brand and with his voters. You need to have a repeal and replace, and I think that's one of the things with the president people got to keep in mind is he very much views himself as a problem solver, someone who's a solutions oriented, and just an outright repeal I don't think would do it. So now they got to get it right, but before that, got to go and get some wins.
Here's the problem. Leadership wanted to do it, and Trump wanted to do this simultaneously. Other people wanted to do it in 2 steps to make sure you got the repeal. It's the same debate we have over border security all the time, right? Everyone, a lot of the Democrats want to do comprehensive immigration reform. Conservatives say no, secure that border first, and then maybe we'll talk about the other stuff. Same thing with Obamacare. Repeal this bill first, then we'll talk about the other stuff.
David? There are many good ideas around this table about what ought to be done in the interim, and President Trump has made it very clear he doesn't want to do anything big. But I want to go back to John's point, and that is, it's extraordinary to have a president, as he did today, basically said, to say, well, we failed, and therefore we ought to let the existing system collapse. And a lot of people will suffer in the meantime, but that's not my fault, it's the Democrats' fault.
Democrats started this fires on the Republican fire chief when you put it out.
When you take over the presidency, you often inherit problems from your predecessors policies that you've then got to clean up. You know, Barack Obama inherited George W. Bush's, Iraq War, and Richard Nixon inherited the Vietnam War. They didn't walk away from those. When Franklin Roosevelt got elected, he didn't walk away because Herbert Hoover had these terrible policies. He tried some things, and by the way, he failed several times.
It's
but
only
he
been 64 days. There's
and it
time
seems
for
to
him
me
to
that,
come back.
well, I just want to go back to this point. I think Donald Trump has a moral responsibility to people who might be suffering in this country. He cannot simply walk away.
And he will.
To David's point, in addition to inheriting the Iraq War, he also inherited the Bush tax cuts, and we did try for the better part of 2 years to explain and contextualize that the state of the economy owed in some part to Bush's economic policies. That wore out after about 2 or 3 months, because then it becomes the incumbent party's problem. And here the Republicans own every lever of power. It's going to be impossible for them over the next 2 years to try to blame the Democrats, also because Democrats, to the extent that there are failures that arise in the system now, they're going to be willing to work with him on a one-off basis on practical solutions. Elijah Cummings went to the White House a couple weeks ago to talk to President Trump about reducing the cost of prescription drugs. He is there willing to...
GOP plan, but also made a surprising confession. Listen.
We have come up with a solution that's really, I think, very good. Now, I have to tell you, it's an unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that health care could be so complicated.
A couple people maybe knew. We're back with the panel. Sanjay, I mean, you see the effects of Obamacare every day as a doctor. From a patient perspective, from the medical community's perspective, what was the most controversial change being mulled over by Republicans?
You know, in my opinion, I think, and this may be a more nuanced one, but this essential health benefit thing that came up over the last couple of days, something that people didn't pay a lot of attention to, I think was probably certainly the most important provision that they were thinking about removing from this new plan. Remember, Anderson, it's called the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. People forget that. The patient protections part of it was a big deal. And this idea that you could buy insurance plans before the Affordable Care Act went into place that just weren't very good insurance plans, that if you actually got sick or you got in an accident, they may not cover your emergency room visit, they may not cover your ambulance ride, they may not cover an operation you need in the hospital. And that's what you have insurance for. That's the sort of nature of insurance. And keep in mind, also in 2009, 62% of bankruptcies in the United States were because of medical expenses. And many of those people had insurance. They had health care insurance. It just wasn't adequate insurance. So the idea that you once again make these what are called skinny plans or junk plans, put them out there, I think was really concerning. I think for the medical community and also for patients, that you thought you were insured, but when you actually needed it, it wasn't there for you.
David, David Gergen, I heard you say earlier that this was shaping up, in your opinion, to be the worst first 100 days of any presidency. Do you stand by that?
I do. I did have a note from Sam Feiss saying, you forgot William Henry Harrison. And he was
again, that sounds like a Jeffrey Lord note.
Yeah, right, exactly. And he was the general who refused to dress properly on a cold, bitter day and rode his horse down Pennsylvania Avenue. Came down with pneumonia and died. He had 97 days, a very quiet final 100 days. But it's hard to think of any other president, certainly in modern times, but I can't think of any other president. We've had a lot of presidents, Anderson, who stumbled in the first 100 days. Yeah, Bill Clinton had some stumbles. He was slipped on some banana peels. But, Jack Kennedy had a Bay of Pigs. It often happens, you make mistakes. But we've never had this kind of major legislative catastrophe on top of all the kind of investigations that are underway and the attacks on his credibility, which I think are eroding trust and belief in him. And so he's come out of this very battered, I think, as president. He's not the same. He doesn't command the heights the way he did when he came in. That's not to say he can't recover. It is to say he's had a terrible 100 days.
In terms of, you worked in White Houses for Republicans and Democrats. In terms of recovering from something like that, is it a shakeup of staff? Is it...
They need a David Gergen.
Then they'll have the worst 1,000 days. Listen, I think he is going to need to, I'm not sure he needs the name to change the people, but he clearly needs to change the structure so that there's an orderly structure of governing within the White House.
A lot of chiefs of staff I've talked to have said there's too many people senior advisors who can get the president's ear in one way or another and not clear portfolios.
Yeah, the structure that has worked best for presidents over time is a pyramidal structure in which the president's on top. There's the chief of staff is right there, right underneath the president. Everything comes through the chief of staff, all the paper, all the coordination, to ensure that the president gets the wide spectrum of views and judgments that he needs in order to be a good, effective president. It means you have to bear down as president. You got to read. You can't do this. You can't do this by outsourcing things, as Amanda made the point earlier. And I think he's got to do a lot of things to put it back on track. And it starts with getting new. I think he's got a better national security team than he did.
We've got to take a quick break.
Sure.
More breaking news. 3 former Trump advisors have volunteered to talk with Congress about their possible collusion or contacts with Russia. Plus, House Intelligence Chair Devin Nunes sparked some new controversy. I wonder what your reaction to that is.
Well, there's a couple of obvious reactions. Number one is it's not the chairman of the intelligence panel's job to stop heat from the media headed in the president's direction. Secondly, it is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee's job to oversee an objective investigation of what Director Comey of the FBI told us they are also investigating, which is the possibility that there might have been, as he put it, links or coordination with Trump associates and the Russians. Of course, his act, as well as his act today, canceling an open hearing with some witnesses this week, sadly, sums up to an awful lot of efforts to slow down and obstruct this investigation.
That's what I mean. The idea of canceling the open hearing, which was supposed to take next Tuesday with Clapper, Sally Yates, and others. You think that's to basically kind of try to slow things down, or kind of, I guess, continue this idea of keeping heat off the White House?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind what happened. Monday's hearing, at which the FBI director acknowledged the investigation, at which the FBI director and the NSA director said there was absolutely no evidence to support Trump's contention that there was Obama wiretapping in Trump Tower. That was a pretty ugly hearing for the White House. I imagine that the chairman got a heck of a lot of, shall we say, negative feedback from the White House on that hearing. And so consequently, I think he was probably pressured into not allowing that to happen again, which is a real tragedy, not just for the investigation, but for the American people.
I mean, do you think there will be open hearings with those individuals? Because now he's saying he wants to bring in Comey and the head of the NSA, Mike Rogers, back for a second hearing next week, but obviously behind closed doors, so that theoretically they can have more sort of classified or sensitive information discussed.
Well, I mean, I can tell you two things about that. Number one, we're not aware of any particular follow-up that is urgent with Director Comey and Admiral Rogers. Now, obviously, they may want to say things that they can't say in open hearing. But again, as Democrats, we were not told that there was anything particularly urgent. And second, what a remarkable coincidence that that closed hearing would be scheduled or attempted to be scheduled, because I'm not sure it's going to happen, lo and behold, right on top of the open hearing that had been scheduled and in where the witnesses had agreed to appear before us.
You know, when I spoke to you earlier this week, you told me you were, and I'm quoting, shaken by the chairman's behavior with briefing the president. At this point, do you have confidence in Chairman Nunes' ability to actually lead this investigation?
Well, this is now the third or fourth time that Chairman Nunes has done something that has called into question whether he is acting as an impartial chairman of an investigation or whether he's acting as a member of the Trump transition team, which he is. And obviously, he really has to choose one of those two roles. Now, it's profoundly troubling to us, but here's the thing. We're in a little bit of a box because I have to believe that those people who may have something to hide, those connections that might exist, they would love nothing more than for the headline to read, "Democrats walk away from the investigation," and that the investigation shuts down. So we are going to remain dogged here. We are producing witness lists. We are, demanding evidence. We're going to keep working here and just hope that the chairman eventually comes to decide that he will, in fact, lead an objective investigation.
We also learned today that Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Carter Page, they've all said they will come and testify in front of the committee. Earlier this week, you told me you certainly wanted them to do so. Do you know what sort of how you plan to go about that with them, or have you not even gotten there?
Well, we're in the process now of developing witness lists, and it'll be a preliminary witness list because, of course, once you've interviewed people, you may learn things that cause you to want to interview others. But we are in the process of developing that list. Those names will certainly be on it, along with many others, and obviously it's a step in the right direction if we don't have to actually subpoena somebody, but they come voluntarily. So that's actually a little piece of good news in what was otherwise a tough day for the investigation.
All right, Congressman Hyams, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Anderson.
Well, just ahead tonight, Paul Manafort's offer to testify about his Russia connections comes as he's pushing back on fresh allegations over his ties to a Russian oligarch. Details on that ahead.
I just don't